Hi there, and welcome to part 2 of the Atomic Chess series on One Knight H3. To avoid some keep calling it One Knight H3, referred to from now on as the Trojan Knight opening, as this was how it was labelled in quite a famous Atomic Chess page by Vlasov. There'll be a link to that in the description. That was set up, I think, in 1995, and it was the first time that any of the Atomic openings were given official names. There's been a sort of more modern name update, which was done by, among other players, Siggy Manon, who's a very strong atomic player who plays mainly on free chess. There'll also be a link to that in the description as well. So for now on, we refer to this as the Trojan Knight opening, beginning of One Knight H3. Talking about the history of the opening, there's not that much I can say about it from before I started playing, which was in about 2002. But from 2002 to about late 2004, there was a general consensus among all strong players that the best way to play against this move was playing f6. Um, the way the games usually went, at least on the Internet Chess Club where I was playing, known as the ICC, was e4, followed by knight a3 and d4 after some moves by black. This was popularised by the number one chess player on ICC called the Chess Kid. I believe he still plays there. He's still a very strong atomic player, and he had really good results of it and played it almost exclusively with white. Um, but though he did very well with it, it's not really, in my opinion, a major threat to playing f6. There are several ways black can get quite a good game. Instead of a6, I prefer playing b5, and maybe after d4 you can play knight h6, which shows one of the benefits of playing f6 rather than h6 is that you can develop your knight to this h6 square. White's almost forced to take it really, and then either e5. Black seems to be getting his fair share of play in my opinion, or you can even swap off this bishop like this. Yeah, I don't see how White's got a significant advantage here. Certainly hasn't got any immediate knockout blows, but it's quite a positional way of playing for White, and not while not threatening, it's an easy way to get a good game with a similar position every time. So if you know the typical plans, you can get quite good scores. Other players played a similar way to this, maybe without knight h3, maybe with d4 immediately, or even on move 2. The general style of game is going to be very similar. Um, the other players deviated with maybe a more critical move, e3, which is a lot more tactical. Um, Actually, it was my first main opening as white as well. This e3 move. In black, white follows on with moves like bishop out to d3 and queen out to f3. Quite aggressive. The move knight g5 threat coming in as well. I don't remember copying this from anyone else, but I'm sure it's quite a natural move. So I'm sure it's all been played probably long before I started. And recently, I think other people have picked it up as well. I remember it caught a lot of people by surprise when they were all expecting the chess kid style opening. But I don't think this is particularly threatening either. Um, Black can play either d5, which can transpose to another mainline opening of the knight g5, or e6, which is probably more sensible. After this, if White carries on with the standard bishop d3, Black has a very strong move at f5. Um, the reason it's quite hard to play anything else is g6, queen f3. It's now very difficult for Black to stop all of White's threats. Um, Knight g5 is coming in. Even bishop takes g6 is quite a strong idea here. I remember getting that in a few times. But f5. Now the most critical move has to be knight g5, seeing as Black's sort of unprotected this square. But now h6, and the point is that Black's queen's coming out to h4. Quite devastating effects really. So White really has to move his knight, otherwise his opening's a complete failure. He's got two options. knight f7, in which case this is quite forcing. G3, bishop b4, c3, queen h3. Now, in order to sort of protect against the mate threat on f1, white has to somehow get in queen h5. Problem is, at the moment, obviously, it won't be with check, so he has to somehow move his knight. So knight e5 is one idea. d6, queen h5, g6, queen takes h3, d takes e5, c takes b4, and white hasn't really got any clear advantage after the tactical exchange. There are a couple of other ideas for white as well. Don't know it's worth spending too much time on it. It's not really a critical line, but say bishop b5. King f8 now runs into queen g4, which is very strong for white. So instead black has to block. So c6. And now white has the extra option of playing knight d6. Knight d6, bishop takes, and again I think this is petering out to quite a levelish game. In fact, black's doing quite well here. In fact, after c takes b5, slight advantage for black. So basically, if black knows this f5 move, it's not threatening either. So this was the general status of the theory in about 2004. f6 was considered, quite safe. There wasn't really anything that white could do to blow black away. Of course, other moves were also played at the time, such as e6, e5, c6. Go through those in a moment. g5 is a well-known move to be completely losing. e3. Now white's threatening queen h5, which will win on the spot. Black has two moves to prevent that. h5, so obviously preventing white from going there. In which case white follows up with queen f3, with the idea of coming into d5 with the queen. The only move that can stop that and defend against f7 is knight f6. White responds with knight takes g5, opening up the attack on f6, f7, and then queen d5 with a simple win. Perhaps slightly more tricky is knight f6 to start with. Well, still fairly straightforward for white. Queen f3, opening up the threat of knight takes g5 again. So whatever white really does, say black plays rook g8 is probably, as it goes, the trickiest. Now knight takes g5 fails to rook takes g2. So instead, white plays bishop d3 with the added threat now of bishop g6, which is completely winning, and black has no real response. Maybe d5 and run with the king. Bishop f5, followed by mate. So the main real alternatives are e5, which has always been quite popular actually. It's known as the Vlasov's defence, after the website I mentioned earlier. After knight g5, white really has to take advantage of black leaving the square undefended. f5. Now I think quite a few moves here are quite strong, but my favourite is d4. Black's idea is basically that the natural knight f7 can be answered with queen h4, and black's getting some really quite strong play now. It's quite impulsive just to play that straight away. It's best to play d4 or e3 as well is quite a good move to sort of prevent this idea. There's not really much that black can do here, in my opinion. Knight c6, b4 keeps that knight well and truly under wraps, and there's no real counterplay. I think white's actually winning. Similarly, e6 is one other move. one of the strong early atomic players on the ICC. Duke Nukem used to play this way, but again, I think it's maybe I can play e4 here. Very strong, very large advantage if not winning for white. A more interesting move is actually c6. This came up quite a lot later than the other moves. I mean, it seems quite silly, but it's not trivial really. I mean, there's quite a trap here. If white grabs the material on h7, black has a tactic of queen a5 and it's swinging over to f5 as follows. And maybe white is slightly better here, but I think black should be able to draw with accurate play. Unfortunately for black, there's a more accurate move, e3, and it's very hard to find a reasonable option for black now. The knight will come into f7 next move. So queen a5, b4, queen f5, with the same idea as before, but now the problem is queen f3. Follow on a couple of moves, queen g4, queen e4, with a winning position. Possibly queen d5 is slightly more accurate, but again I don't think there's anything really there. The bishop d3, too many threats. White's got this knight coming into f7 or h7, and black's got nothing really.